is a person without whom this conference would not have happened, who has covered all the bases and some bases that I didn't even know were there, is a lifelong educator, is about to enter a later decade of her life and has much to reflect upon. So I give you Paula Phipps.
Let's not guess about which decade that is. I don't have a PowerPoint, and I don't know that I can get across what I want to say the way Reverend Mariama could do it without a PowerPoint. But
Yeah, you can stand back from the mic, just relax.
But I can stand back. Okay. And we'll check and see if I need my glasses here. So I've been asked to talk about something quite difficult, which Tim spoke about very eloquently this morning, which is the possibility of extinction, which is a very, something that's probably on everyone's mind, but maybe on a very, very back burner or deep in our unconscious. And my talk is called Close Encounters with a Problematic Future. At the dawn of history, and I'm quoting from somebody who was writing from a Western civilization perspective, as far as what the dawn of history was, Europe was covered with immense primeval forests. In the forest of Arden, it was said that down to modern times, a squirrel might leap from tree to tree for nearly the whole length of Warwickshire. The clear-cut pictures that you saw today show you what has happened to that immense primeval forest. And I want to ask you for a moment to do what I've been doing, thinking for a few minutes, not enough, about the rapid changes we can see in the world around us. The disappearance of insects, for example, that people have spoken about several times in this conference. We don't have to brush them away anymore. We don't have to wash them off the windshields of our cars. We don't have to worry around here about getting bitten by a mosquito. They're just not here anymore. A recent study in Germany reported a 76% decline in insects over the last 27 years, along with a 15% decline in bird populations over the last 10 years. And it, I might just say that birds need to feed their babies the grubs of various insects. That's the only food that keeps baby birds going, developing and living. And on a very personal note, there are some woods in Concord where I've been tramping and swimming for 40 years. And a year or two ago, when I went out to take a walk in the woods, and this is not the woods around Walden Pond, but another set of forested land that you can walk to for an enormous distance, really. And I went there a year or two ago and entered the woods and realized that there was not one bird singing, not one. And the berries on the bushes were hanging down, full and ripe, with no one to eat them. And I walked deeper into those woods, And after a while, I was brought to a halt because the shadow of a large bird's wings flew up in the air in front of me. And as I stopped standing there in the woods, I realized that there was an owl on a branch about 30 feet away from me, facing me, and we stood there and faced each other for a long time. It was clearly a silent communication. It was very sad. Everything has a season and must die, but this was a different dying, and I felt that we were acknowledging it. In those same woods 20 years earlier, I had written a poem called A Particular Curl. A breath of fragrance at one point on a pathway 2 feet away is gone. No flowering bush in sight. And you know a particular curl of air has wafted through the woods, and you are on its path. This tender encounter I share with you. So when I allow myself to feel what it is I rarely allow myself to feel, it is an enormous sadness, and that is because I fear that this extraordinary, complex, interconnected, and interdependent gift of life is slipping away. Extinction is a dreaded word. We avoid it because we cannot bear to think it or to feel it. There are growing numbers of people all around the world working as creatively and quickly as they can at adaptations, mitigations, conservation, restorations, what we feel we need to do to survive right now in 10 years, 20 years, or 100. But there is a price to be paid for avoiding the thought that we may have already or are about to pass critical tipping points. One enormous cost is that we miss opportunities that we believe might still turn this crisis around, change the trajectory. The other enormous cost is to our children and to all the other species that would cease to be. So I ask you to take a moment and allow yourself to feel. If the sixth extinction is fully upon us, what are you most sad will no longer exist, will cease to be? Can you hold a picture of that in your mind now? Is it a thing? A relationship? And let it go? Perhaps it was a particular species, or oh so painfully, a child or a grandchild. Or perhaps it is the way things have evolved together, how everything has been co-created, how when Mount St. Helens was burned to ash, rodents that survived underground came out when things had cooled, and large animals came from outside the burned areas and walked the slopes, and their hooves created indentations in the ash where other forms of life could live. And insects, yes, the insects. They played a major role in the recovery of Mount St. Helens, the rapid recovery. And here I will quote, "In some of these areas where insects were first to arrive, their corpses and other debris served as fodder for plant seeds, allowing vegetation and then small animals to return. And then the whole thing just takes off. Life reasserted itself even in death because life wants to go on. But we are facing today the possibility that what we call the higher forms of life will not be able to survive the extremes of heat or atmospheric change that are impending. And the question for us today is how we face that possibility and go on. I was distributing conference posters a few weeks ago, and I stopped in at an antique store whose owner I had met once before. She took the poster, and after a long moment and looking close to tears, she said, "My friends are starting to think it's too late." And I avoided entering that space with her, and I talked about how people come to our conferences full of doom and gloom and leave hopeful and inspired, which is often true. But I felt that I had let both of us down. She, because she showed me how she was feeling, and I didn't validate it. And I, because I did not let myself have that shared experience with her. Because I think it is time for us to feel and share the sadness that this moment requires and deserves, and to talk about it. It is not time for guilt or blame. It is time to feel and to prepare, and it is also time to go on fighting, because there are reasons to be hopeful. We need to be able to do both. As a preschool teacher and school director, I began to notice the children's awareness of problems in the natural world around them that we never talked about in school. One 5-year-old boy made a large easel painting of what he called rocks falling through the hole in the sky. A couple of years later, another child his age drew picture after picture of volcanoes, lightning strikes, and people lying dead on the ground after a major earthquake occurred in his home country. It was several weeks before he could finally look at a map and understand how far away he was from that event, that he was safe. In 2006, 5 years after 9/11 and a year after Hurricane Katrina, the Connecticut Commission for Children gave the children in that state the opportunity to talk, write, and draw how they were feeling and what they were thinking. This was 6 years before the school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut, where 20 kindergarten children and staff members were killed, and it was already very clear to the children that adults could not keep them safe. The children knew even then that something was very wrong. Their response to Hurricane Katrina and the images they had been seeing of people waiting long times for rescue, stranded on rooftops, were summed up by the Connecticut Commission in this PowerPoint as mistrust of government, along with compassion and a desire to help people who were hurting. The war in Iraq was also on many children's minds, and it appeared to the authors of this study that for many children, 9/11, natural disasters, and wars were conflated. The lines between them had blurred, and the fears had become generalized. And yet, many children and teens were still hopeful. And the Commission's conclusion was that the children wanted to help. They wanted to help solve the problems they saw, but their concern and desire to help, they felt, were not acknowledged. They felt ignored. In 2012 and 2013, I was putting together a website that I helped would provide school systems with information about preparation for extreme weather events, helping children prepare and anticipate those events, and providing support afterwards. There were many excellent resources, including policy papers by the National Association of School Psychologists on how to prepare for hurricanes, for tsunamis, for earthquakes. But several years later, they were all taken off the web. They were no longer available, and they were replaced by policies for schools on preparing for terrorist attacks. Climate change was not happening. A study done by the city of New Orleans at least 5 years after Katrina, stated that 40% of the children in the school district continued to have severe post-traumatic stress serious symptoms years later that had impacted their behavior and their ability to learn, and that did not include, of course, the thousands of children who never returned to school. A New Orleans kindergarten teacher, somebody who had moved to New Orleans after Katrina, wanting to help, when I asked her what would have helped the children be better prepared, said they did not even have the word storm in their vocabulary. They had no name for what was happening to them. So the question is, why should we talk about things that are scary with children? First, because there is a very good chance that they are feeling scared already. Certainly they are worried about their own safety and the safety of those they love when in the news they see images of flooded streets and destroyed homes, forest fires burning out of control and destroying entire cities. But what is the effect of not talking about the worries they have? If they do not speak about it on their own, should we bring it up? In private conversation with Dr. Richard Bromfield, author of the book Living with the Boogeyman, which I really advise, it's not here, it's a very good book. He wrote it for parents and teachers after 9/11, and he suggested to me, he agreed with me, that talking matter-of-factly with children about extreme weather events could serve as an inoculation. And the converse, I believe, is also true. Not talking about something the children are worrying about suggests that the adults are too worried about it to talk about it too, and that can make it even scarier. In 2014, the journal Pediatrics reported a 37% increase in the number of teens who said that they had had a major depressive episode, one lasting 2 weeks or longer in the previous 12 months, compared with reports from 2005. In Los Angeles, the school district said that more than 30% of high schoolers reported prolonged feelings of hopelessness and sadness lasting more than 2 weeks. And this was true for middle schoolers too, 9.1%. More than 3 million teenagers reported major depressive episodes, and that represents about 12% of the teenagers in the country at the time. A month ago, the New York Times published an article by Benoit Denizit-Lewis titled, "Why Are More American Teenagers Than Ever Suffering from Severe Anxiety?" And he quotes Jean Twenge, a professor of psychology at San Francisco State, who found trend lines correlating depression in teens with smartphone adoption. Since 2011, the trend lines increased at essentially the same rate. But the question remains, to what extent use of social media is causing anxiety, and to what extent it is an escape from it. The article explores whether kids should be pushed to face their fears. These young people know, somewhere in their consciousness, that their world is falling apart, and I suspect social media is a form of avoidance or denial. Lynn Lyons, a psychotherapist consulting to schools about teen anxiety, who is in much demand now all over the country, has this to say: "Anxiety is all about the avoidance of uncertainty and discomfort. When we play along, we don't help kids learn to cope or problem solve in the face of unexpected results." So how do we do it? We go on doing the education and restoration work that is needed to turn the trajectory we are on around. And when we have conversations with young people, we try to be as honest as we can be about what is going on. We make sure we tell them about climate heroes like Wangari Maathai, who led the reforestation movement in Kenya, John Todd, who taught us how to purify toxic water, Gordon Sato, who let everyone know how important it was to restore mangrove forests, and Alan Savory, who taught us how we can bring soil health back to desertified lands. So, and I think probably more than that, people all over the planet who are restoring ecosystems, and how all of us, including the children, youth, and young adults, can be ecosystem restorers through simple acts in everyday life. Knowing that what we're doing and how we are living is good for the planet, is good for us too. That is how we go on, and that is how we manage worry and fear. Young people will want to help, will want to be part of the solution. Let's find out what they're thinking. Let's not avoid the hard conversations. I stood on the stairs outside a few mornings ago, and I looked at a sweet pear tree whose leaves had just begun to change color, about 2 months late, but starting to change color, and I watched the leaves drifting into the yard, and I watched a winged seed do a dance in the breeze before it found a patch of land, a patch of soil to land on. And I thought about the young farmers that Sally and Dale are nurturing, and how we grow the numbers of people we need who are so in love with nature that they devote themselves to nurturing it. And the young children who will, we hope, learn how the natural world is actually their home. Yes, to the four walls around them, but also the nature that nurtures them, our life support system. We are in a moment that is the culmination, or let's not say culmination, which is a very critical moment in our long history on this planet. Let's live it honestly and lovingly. I should go back to culmination for that possibility. My favorite time of day as a school director was spent in a park with the children, where this fantastic variety of trees invited climbing and house building. One of those trees with the children on it was what I pictured when Joan asked us to think of a favorite tree. We may need to talk calmly about extreme weather that's happening, but let us not make nature scary. It gets a little wild sometimes, but it's our home. And if we take better care of it than we have been doing, it just may take good care of us. But it does seem that it will get worse before it gets better. So let's prepare, and let's do it with love.